Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. What the Truth Can Destroy. Episode 157.
Okay, nothing obviously out of line with the century-old 14-volume history of Absalom that was left in his bedroom in the Imperial Palace, where the conspiracy brought him immediately after faking the Zon Kuthon God War, the point at which the conspiracy started to take its game against him seriously. That probably wasn't enough time for them to fake entire books, which is why they gave him a century-old set of 14 books, which is the sort of thing that Conspiracy Asmodia would not have permitted if she'd then been in charge. She would have had his room devoid of books, rather than do that. There's a lot of reasons they might be trying to hide something that happened in the last century, but whatever it is, it's even more likely to be in Absalom than elsewhere. And Keltham has any idea of what Absalom was like a century ago. He can't exactly sight-read the city skyline. For all he knows, anything really tall could be the Starstone Cathedral. But the wide variety of weird tall buildings at least looks like Absalom should look. Does Keltham see anything that looks like a bookshop?
Not in the Grand Bazaar. It's mostly food carts, selling fresh fish and things just arrived on merchant ships. Grains, livestock, textiles. Fenellosa asks privately if he should stay away from the slave markets.
Ideally not, because they've claimed to Keltham that other places are worse than Cheliax, and that'd be useful as evidence. However, if there are children in the slave markets, he's going to have an entire full-scale breakdown about that. Someone should scout ahead, spend some gold, and get any children removed or illusioned into adults/halflings/gnomes, after which Fenellosa can walk through there as normal.
Okay, if I hold the mirror less conspicuously, it's like advertising I'm not paying attention to my surroundings, says Fenellosa, weaving through a bunch of stalls of pigs and ducks and caged cats.
Call it 1.5x. For Conspiracy, the description Keltham had read in the century-old book implied more of a chance that you could buy everything in the Grand Bazaar, where you would have thought that everything would include books. Message: head to where you'd expect to find bookshops, please. Fiction preferred to non-fiction, if that distinction exists in Golarion. Fiction books are harder to coherently rewrite on the fly, easier to change a paragraph in an encyclopedia than to change a key plot point.
I haven't been here in a while, okay if I ask someone where to go?
Asmodia is confused by why they don't want Keltham having a full-scale meltdown about child slaves in Absalom, to the point of changing the fabric of local reality in a possibly inconsistent way about that. But she realizes this may not be the best time for Sevar to stop and explain her reasoning.
Go for it.
Carissa would love Keltham to have a breakdown if it meant he'd stop pursuing Conspiracy. She suspects it instead means he demands Owl's wisdom and Fox's cunning.
Good wheel day, says Fenellosa to a stall vendor. I'm looking for booksellers. Where would I find those?
You're on the wrong side of the market, sir. They're uptown from here.
Thank you.
There sure are a lot of different people in Golarion. Less variety in clothing compared to Dathilan, of course, but the people inside the clothes sure are different. Does that person have scales? She's pretty. Keltham will have to think about whether or not he's perverted enough to ask Meritxell to look like that next time.
A toad breathes fire at him from one of the stalls. A woman wrings a chicken's neck and hands it off to a tall, green-skinned orc. A beggar grabs at his feet and starts a spiel about his dying wife. And if he has a go-ahead from the lead team, which is covering up any Abaddon holy symbols they see as well as any child slaves, he'll cut through the slave markets on his way uptown.
Go.
Absalom has periodically debated abolishing the slave markets, not the institution of slavery, nor even the slave trade. Both bring Absalom much prosperity. But the markets, yes, they're an unpleasant place, an eyesore both literally and metaphorically. They make people who don't mind slavery in the slightest uneasy. The slaves are mostly very minimally dressed, in some cases nude. Some are in cages, but most are for efficiency just chained to each other, shackled hands and feet. Most of them stare at the ground or at the wall. Some are crying, some are struggling. There's an auction block, where a man with a booming voice is collecting bids on a lot just arrived from distant Casmera. There are no children. This required ripping some babies out of their mother's arms before Fenellosa got there, but their owners were duly compensated.
and give the babies back afterwards. Even nearly fully corrupted Keltham will care about that, not to mention that Snack Service is about to threaten me about it.
Snack Service would otherwise have advised Carissa Sever against disrupting future relations with Keltham had she been that silly. The suspicious Asmodeans should really have enough evidence by now to update about some things. They should not feel constrained in how they serve Asmodeus by Snack Service's presence, even if Kate and Kalian wouldn't like something. Snack Service will warn them if they're about to do something that is about to significantly harm Asmodeus's interests simultaneously with Kate and Kalian's.
He closes his eyes after a few seconds. Whatever this is, if there's a reason for conspiracy to fake it, Keltham shouldn't cooperate with that reason and give them a retroactive reason to arrange this. That's a reason to keep his eyes closed, right? Carissa, he says. Not by message. Tell me when he's through. That does not particularly look like a situation that sane people would not suicide out of. Maybe if it was temporary. Maybe those are neutral evil, or chaotic neutral people, and this is the section of the market where they sell people who can't say no. In which case, blowing up Absalom to stop this wouldn't particularly be helping them. Or maybe they lied to him about afterlives. That's rising in prominence too. He'll give them this. It doesn't feel like conspiracy so much as it feels like an ordinary that is wronger than they told him yet, in ways that they have, per his own request, held off from rushing to tell him about.
She squeezes his hand. I'll tell you. Fenalosa could teleport out now, while Keltham's not looking, but it's not like they have an entire approved bookshop in Cheliax for him to go to either. If anything, a bookshop in Cheliax would probably reveal more. Fenalosa should proceed, and the team that came up with all the Keltham-approved books should put those Keltham-approved books in Fenalosa's bag of holding for ease of swapping in either at the bookstore or subsequently. As soon as they're out of the slave markets, then, and just entering a section of bazaar that's full of animal skins and leathers and furs, okay, it's over.
Keltham doesn't answer. He's running through basic possibilities for abolishing the slave trade in Golarion, just in case he's missing something obvious. Some of the thoughts are along the lines of, maybe don't sell any +4 intelligence headbands to Absalom, and if this is what Cheliax was like before the church took over, they might have done some pretty extreme things in the takeover process that they'd want to conceal from me until I understood why that was necessary. Both of which are explanations for why the conspiracy would want to fake this. If he decides this world is real, among Keltham's next steps is going to be talking to that paladin to find out what Good's current plans are on this slavery thing. If Ordinary were deliberately protecting him from this, though, they should have warned him about it, not just walked him into an abused people market. He's going to focus on this test, needs to focus on this test. It also matters, even on this scale. And something about him is taking all of this more seriously, now, even to the point of being willing to inconvenience bystanders. But he's not, quite, seeing what he should. The conspiracy has obvious responses. No, he's not thinking clearly. Even if they have obvious responses, he should run the test anyways. The trouble is not thinking about things. Keltham is looking for somebody in his field of vision who looks like they might be the local equivalent of a security wizard, or police officer, or the non-Nadal version of a person carrying an expensive sword. He's not able to stop himself from thinking that the point is to find somebody who'd be difficult to mind control, or who it'd be a very big deal to mind control. And now that he's gone and thought that, he needs to pick a subject immediately if possible, before they have time to cast an illusion about it.
Is he by any chance going to pick the Chelish agent on the lead team who is disguised as a priest of Sarenrae and who is purchasing blankets at the stall right up ahead? Or the Chelish agent on the lead team who is disguised as a powerful Vudrani wizard flying lazily overhead, shouting instructions while his harried assistant makes purchases for him? Or the perfectly legitimate but low-level guard stationed at the edge of the slave market?
Yep, totally going for the Sarenrae priest. Message. Can you ask that person buying blankets if they'd be willing to answer some quick questions for 5 GP, or more if you think it takes more? Keltham is substantially increasing the amount beyond what he'd have to offer in Dathilan because low-trust environment, And also he might be about to get some innocent mind controlled, with hopefully low probability.
Fenalosa will head over to the priest of Sarenrae. Excuse me, Father, would you be willing to answer some questions on the spot for 5 gold pieces?
Well, I'd have to say that it'd depend on the questions. The man responds in Taldane with a distinctly Taldor Taldane accent.
Message. They'll be about Cheliax, Nidal, Zonkethan, and Asmodeus. Also ask him if he's okay being messaged directly by someone he can't see, and replying in kind.
Fenalosa repeats this faithfully.
Well, I don't mind someone messaging me with questions, the priest says, but I don't know that I'll have very satisfactory answers for them and wouldn't want them to feel their gold was misspent.
Message directly to person who looks like he'd be hard to mind control. Assuming I otherwise got here from very far away and am pretty ignorant of things, what would you say are the most interesting things that happened with Cheliax, Nidal, Zon-Kuthon, or Asmodeus over the last year?
Well, they went to war, the priest replies immediately. Zon-Kuthon's army attacked Cheliax, or so I heard at least, and then the gods united against Zon-Kuthon. Message doesn't permit long replies if you can't cast it yourself, and he can't.
Any else?
The gods locked Zon-Kuthon away. The war is still ongoing. The Church of Sarenrae is engaged by Cheliax for healing.
Any else?
Not that I'm thinking of immediately, no. Certainly nothing as momentous as that.
Any weird news come to mind involving Cheliax in the last year? He's not able to stop his thoughts from mentioning the word lead, but at least he got this far, and that's already some evidence against Ordinary.
That's not fair. There's no chance that random priests of Sarenrae would be apprised of Cheliax's leaded pot-related initiatives.
I've heard a rumor that after the God War started, all the gods agreed not to intervene in Cheliax so as not to tear it apart with their fighting.
He'll assign retrospective likelihoods later that a medical priest wouldn't have heard the news about lead inside Ordinary, versus the likelihood that conspiracy wouldn't think of it until too late, and then not want to tip off that they read the plan out of his mind. Message. You can answer this one out loud. It's long. What is Sarenrae's position on Asmodeus's takes? 121, 13, 31, 14641, if it's too complex, if it's too simple. 161, 051, 1771561.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Message. Asmodeus has some positions on compacts, on power relations between humans, and on free will. Does Sarenrae's church agree or disagree with those positions, and if so, why?
We're in favor of free will. Good should and can be chosen. It doesn't have to be imposed. In intimacy, people should practice the virtue of concern for the other. That's a classic good-evil disagreement, I suppose. For contracts, I'd say mostly Sarenrae's church has a different focus. Sarenrae is the goddess of the sun, of redemption, of healing, of the good in everyone. I would say that she agrees that contracts can be important and should be precise and fair, but only because, as far as I know, that works out better for people than not doing that.
Well, he's not giving answers as detailed as the Paladin, which maybe figures for somebody accosted by weird questions in the middle of a giant amateur market. It's not following the previous pattern of the Paladin giving answers more detailed about evil than about good. And there haven't been any anomalies in the mirror, or in the apparent symbol from his truth spell, that Keltham drew in iridescence or the baseline script inside it, so either it was an honest answer, or they mind-controlled the guy, or they ran a sufficiently realistic illusion. That was mostly what Keltham was expecting would happen inside Conspiracy. This didn't seem like a likely test to blow things open. It revolved around possibilities of magic, illusion, mind control, and those are places where the Conspiracy controlled almost all the information he got. But he tested it, just in case. Seeing the slave market reminded Keltham, a little, what it means to be involved in serious business and to maybe make a more serious effort at breaking apart his world, if it could be broken. Message to Priest. Thanks, that's it. Message to Fenalosa. Please continue looking for a bookshop.
Fenalosa will pay the guy 5 gold and then keep looking for a bookshop. This end of the bazaar is more upscale. Fancy textiles, food vendors, shoe shiners, jewelers. There's a bookshop over there. The proprietor has been knocked unconscious and is sleeping upstairs. There's a new temporary proprietor. In he goes.
Is Keltham in range to see what kinds of books this bookshop carries?
Like most bookshops, it carries an eclectic range of books that the proprietor got her hands on to copy. The sign on the door just says books from all around the world.
Any foreign language titles visible?
It looks like she carries Taldane and Kellish mostly, and then one shelf up high is labeled Distant Shores and has some Tien and some other harder-to-identify languages.
He'll save his comprehend languages until he finds a bookshop that carries more foreign titles. Then, it doesn't last as long when cast from scroll. No, that's the wrong way to think about it. That potentially gives the conspiracy too much time to catch him if his thoughts slip up. Message to proprietor. Hi, I'm shopping by Scry today. Sorry for this weird request, but if you can immediately go over to one of your books and open it to a section with something inside critical of Cheliax, in any way at all, however minor, I'll immediately buy that book. Bonus points. If it's in a language that isn't Taldane. Yes, this is also testing whether the proprietor is being mind-controlled in a way that doesn't permit the controller to access native knowledge about their own books.
The person at the desk, who appears to be a boy of about 15, startles. "Is this some kind of scam?" he says suspiciously. "I'll call the watch. I need to be directed to whichever of the books we placed contains criticism of Cheliax."
No scam. My patron's just very secretive and somewhat eccentric, Fenalosa says, and sets 2 gold coins on the counter. Please do whatever he asked.
The boy snatches up the 2 gold coins, bites them. "All right then," he says. "I don't speak any other languages, so I'm not going to get the bonus points." And he picks a book off the shelf and starts leafing through it. "There's got to be something in here because this is from Andoran and they don't like Cheliax one bit. Just give me a minute, okay?"
Sure, he'll give a minute. Establishes baseline. Too slow, too fast. How much should a bookstore operator know his own books?
From a speech by the Supreme-elect Andira Marusek. If Cheliax declared the slave trade over, it would end without a shot fired. But Cheliax has embraced as their national philosophy this: it's not our problem. And secondarily this: we're already saving the world, stop complaining. As if it would cost the ships that already patrol these seas a single penny to make it known they'd stop slavers. They will tell you they have no means to, but the truth is this: they don't care to. It's pretty critical, I'd say.
Seems kind of unfair to me, really, Fenalosa says.
Does it have to be a fair criticism? I don't know what you'll count.
Keltham doesn't really have time to consider whether it's fair or not. He'll consider that later. Right now, he needs to spring his next test before hypothetical mind controllers have too much time to consider it. Message to Fenalosa. Buy that one and start flipping through it. Random pages for me to read. Message to proprietor. Okay, now something critical of Qadira, fast as possible. We'll buy if you find it. Same principle. Keltham knows Qadira exists, mainly because of browsing the Absalom history, not because anybody from Cheliax made any statements about it that they'd want to back up. And Qadira is pretty near here, and people in this region should have political opinions about it. If they planted books about Cheliax here, and the mind controller only knows about those, this request will take longer. Likewise, if it's all an illusion, and they have illusions ready of particular books.
I'll buy it, says Fenalosa. None of the planted books cover Qadira.
5 gold. That's fine. Any book from Taldor on recent history is going to say some critical stuff about Qadira. They've been having border disputes.
He's overcharging you by a factor of 2 or 3, Fenalosa messages the scry irritably. Probably because he's noticed you're rich and eccentric. Should I haggle?
Message. Just pay this one, and mention that you'll only be paying 150% of the fair price on the next one. I do owe him something for incidental exposure to all the weirdness around me, and a bonus for not being able to ask him about that part explicitly for information security reasons.
Fenalosa counts out 5 gold, takes the book, and starts leafing through it. Publication date, 5 years ago. It's about Andoran politics, mostly following the political rise of Marosek, and a series of near conflicts Andoran got into because its neighbors consider it to be sponsoring piracy.
The proprietor looks for a book about Taldane military history. That should have some Qadira and some criticism of Qadirans.
Timing on how long it takes them to locate that book versus the book critical of Cheliax?
Maybe slightly longer to find the book on Qadira, but not all that much, so.
And the criticism there?
This particular author feels that the Qadirans are the enemy of civilization itself and must be defeated in a fierce and immediate offensive rather than be permitted to erode Avistan's defenses bit by bit. Only when the last of them have been slaughtered will Avestan be safe. It is just as critical of Taldor's nobles, who it argues have grown too weak and indolent to hold the border against the Kadiran savages, and are derelict in their duties to themselves, their lands, and all of Taldor. The Kadirans, it argues, are a just punishment for the sins of the Taldane nobles.
That is more the quality of argumentation that Keltham expected of Galarian authors, such as one might find in the library of an archduke's villa. Okay. Suppose that this bookshop contains some planted books, some non-planted books, and is missing some obviously problematic books which were quickly removed by a team that teleported in separately and rushed ahead to carry out that operation and mind control the proprietor. Does the store have an obvious fiction section? Keltham has been reading book titles whenever not otherwise occupied.
The separations it uses are romances, mysteries, histories, and business. It's kind of unclear what's in each, but the first two seem to be mostly fiction.
All right, buy the Kadira critical book, then go to the mysteries section. How many books total?
About 300.
Right then, let's spend 10 minutes on this. Message. Count off every 15th book starting on the third one, putting your finger on each such book so that I can see the title each time. Then, open to 3 random places in each such book, and show each such random place to the scry sensor for 6 seconds. Then buy them all. You can haggle that time. Keltham was initially thinking of just buying books that discussed magic or gods or afterlives, then considered that his fortress doesn't have enough books anyways. If their mystery genre is at all like Dath Ilan's, if there's even a trace of sanity there, key obscure rules of magic should feature in at least some of these novels, and you can't rewrite fiction as easily as nonfiction. The pages will be spoilers, unfortunately, but they should serve as a check against the books being rewritten or substituted before he can read them.
Fenellosa starts doing this with some but not much visible irritation.
"You're careful with the books," says the boy.
I'm buying them.
"Looks like you're waving them in the air."
Well, aren't you a born genius? After I do that, I'll buy them. At a gold apiece.
"They go for 4 normally."
You're a bad liar, kid. In-demand books go for 2 in Cheliax, and Absalom has more trade, so it should be cheaper.
"You're from Cheliax?"
Yes.
"Well then, buy them in Cheliax if you think they're cheaper there."
Keltham's not paying much attention to this repartee, which won't be very informative in the conspiracy worlds where it matters. He's scanning the book glimpses instead.
Book 1. I couldn't keep my eyes off him. Always holding tight by the leg of the table with my hands and feet, I saw the miserable creature finger his glass playfully, take it up, smile, throw his head back, and drink the brandy off. Instantly afterwards the company were seized with unspeakable consternation, owing to his springing to his feet, turning around several times in an appalling, spasmodic, whooping cough dance, and rushing out at the door. He then became visible through the window, violently plunging and expectorating, making the most hideous faces, and apparently out of his mind. I held on tight, while Mrs. Joe and Joe ran to him. I didn't know how I had done it, but I had no doubt I had murdered him somehow. In my dreadful situation, it was a relief when he was brought back, and surveying the company all round as if they had disagreed with him, sank down into his chair with the one significant gasp. Tar. I had filled up the bottle from the tar water jug. I knew he would be worse by and by. I moved the table like a medium of the present day by the vigor of my unseen hold upon it. "Tar!" cried my sister in amazement. "Why, however could tar come there?" But Uncle Pumblechook, who was omnipotent in that kitchen, wouldn't hear the word, wouldn't hear of the subject, imperiously waved it all away with his hand and asked for hot gin and water. My sister, who had begun to be alarmingly meditative, had to employ herself actively in getting the gin, the hot water, the sugar, and the lemon peel, and mixing them. For the time being, at least, I was saved. I still held on to the leg of the table, but clutched it now with the fervor of gratitude. Betook too. Monseigneur Bienvenu had formerly been, if the stories anent his youth, and even in regard to his manhood were to be believed, a passionate and possibly a violent man. His universal suavity was less an instinct of nature than the result of a grand conviction which had filtered into his heart through the medium of life, and had trickled there slowly, thought by thought. For in a character, as in a rock, there may exist apertures made by drops of water. These hollows are ineffaceable, these formations are indestructible. When he conversed with that infantile gaiety which was one of his charms, and of which we have already spoken, people felt at their ease with him, and joy seemed to radiate from his whole person. His fresh and ruddy complexion, his very white teeth, all of which he had preserved and which were displayed by his smile, gave him that open and easy air which caused the remark to be made of a man, "He's a good fellow," and of an old man, "He is a fine man." Book 3. He said this with such evident surprise that I was perplexed what answer to make, and the more so because, coupled with something feeble and wandering in his manner, there were in his face marks of deep and anxious thought which convinced me that he could not be, as I had been at first inclined to suppose, in a state of dotage or imbecility. "I don't think you consider—" I began. "I don't consider," cried the old man, interrupting me. "I don't consider her. Ah, how little you know of the truth. Little Nellie, little Nellie. It would be impossible for any man, I care not what his form of speech might be, to express more affection than the dealer in curiosities did in these 4 words. I waited for him to speak again, but he rested his chin upon his hand, and shaking his head twice or thrice, fixed his eyes upon the fire. While we were sitting thus in silence, the door of the closet opened, and the child returned, her light brown hair hanging loose about her neck, and her face flushed with the haste she had made to rejoin us. She busied herself immediately in preparing supper, and while she was thus engaged, I remarked that the old man took an opportunity of observing me more closely than he had done yet. I was surprised to see that all this time everything was done by the child, and that there appeared to be no other persons but ourselves in the house. I took advantage of a moment when she was absent to venture a hint on this point, to which the old man replied that there were few grown persons as trustworthy or as careful as she. Book 4. It is a great pity that their circumstances should be so confined. A great pity indeed. And I have often wished, but it is so little one can venture to do, small trifling presents, of anything uncommon. Now we have killed a porker, and Emma thinks of sending them a loin or a leg. It is very small and delicate. Hartfield pork is not like any other pork, but still it is pork. And, my dear Emma, unless one could be sure of their making it into steaks, nicely fried, as ours are fried, without the smallest grease, and not roast it, for no stomach can bear roast pork, I think we had better send the leg. Do not you think so, my dear? My dear papa, I sent the whole hind quarter. I knew you would wish it. There will be the leg to be salted, you know, which is so very nice, and the loin to be dressed directly in any manner they like. That's right, my dear, very right. I had not thought of it before, but that is the best way. They must not oversalt the leg, and then, if it is not oversalted, and if it is very thoroughly boiled, just as Searle boils ours, and eaten very moderately of, with a boiled turnip, and a little carrot or parsnip, I do not consider it unwholesome. Book 5. Kit did turn from white to red, and from red to white again, when they secured him thus, and for a moment seemed disposed to resist. But, quickly recollecting himself, and remembering that if he made any struggle he would perhaps be dragged by the collar through the public streets, he only repeated with great earnestness, and with the tears standing in his eyes, that they would be sorry for this, and suffered them to lead him off. While they were on the way back, Mr. Swiveller, upon whom his present function sat very irksomely, took an opportunity of whispering in his ear that if he would confess his guilt, even by so much as a nod, and promise not to do so any more, he would connive at his kicking Samson Brass on the shins and escaping up a court. But Kit indignantly rejecting this proposal, Mr. Richard had nothing for it but to hold him tight until they reached Bevis Marks, and ushered him into the presence of the charming Sarah, who immediately took the precaution of locking the door. "Now you know," said Brass, "if this is a case of innocence, it is a case of that description, Christopher, where the fullest disclosure is the best satisfaction for everybody. Therefore, if you'll consent to an examination," he demonstrated what kind of examination he meant by turning back the cuffs of his coat, "it will be a comfortable and pleasant thing for all parties." "Search me," said Kit, proudly holding up his arms. "But mind, sir, I know you'll be sorry for this to the last day of your life." "It is certainly a very painful occurrence," said Brass with a sigh as he dived into one of Kit's pockets and fished up a miscellaneous collection of small articles. "Very painful. Nothing here, Mr. Richard, sir, all perfectly satisfactory. Nor here, sir, nor in the waistcoat, Mr. Richard, nor in the coat-tails. So far I am rejoiced, I am sure." Richard Swiveller, holding Kit's hat in his hand, was watching the proceedings with great interest, and bore upon his face the slightest possible indication of a smile, as Brass, shutting one of his eyes, looked with the other up the inside of one of the poor fellow's sleeves as if it were a telescope, when Sampson, turning hastily to him, bade him search the hat. "Here's a handkerchief," said Dick. "No harm in that, sir," rejoined Brass, applying his eye to the other sleeve and speaking in the voice of one who was contemplating an immense extent of prospect. "No harm in a handkerchief, sir, whatever. The faculty don't consider it a healthy custom, I believe, Mr. Richard, to carry one's handkerchief in one's hat. I have heard that it keeps the head too warm. But in every other point of view, its being there is extremely satisfactory. Extremely so. Book 6. "Oh, Quilp," said his wife, "what's the matter? Who are you angry with?" "I should drown him," said the dwarf, not heeding her. "Too easy a death, too short, too quick. But the river runs close at hand. Oh, if I had him here, just to take him to the brink coaxingly and pleasantly, holding him by the buttonhole, joking with him, and with a sudden push to send him splashing down. Drowning men come to the surface 3 times, they say. To see him those 3 times and mock him as his face came bobbing up. Oh, what a rich treat that would be." "Quilp," stammered his wife, venturing at the same time to touch him on the shoulder. "What has gone wrong?" She was so terrified by the relish with which he pictured this pleasure to himself that she could scarcely make herself intelligible. "Such a bloodless cur," said Quilp, rubbing his hands very slowly and pressing them tight together. "I thought his cowardice and servility were the best guarantee for his keeping silence. Oh, Brass, my dear, good, affectionate, faithful, complimentary, charming friend, if I only had you here." His wife, who had retreated lest she should seem to listen to these mutterings, ventured to approach him again and was about to speak when he hurried to the door and called Tom Scott, who, remembering his late gentle admonition, deemed it prudent to appear immediately. "There," said the dwarf, pulling him in. "Take her home. Don't come here tomorrow, for this place will be shut up. Come back no more till you hear from me or see me. Do you mind?" Tom nodded sulkily and beckoned Mrs. Quilp to lead the way. Book 7. Lady Dorothea had not left us long before another visitor, as unexpected a one as her ladyship, was announced. It was Sir Edward, who, informed by Augusta of her brother's marriage, came doubtless to reproach him for having dared to unite himself to me without his knowledge. But Edward, foreseeing his design, approached him with heroic fortitude as soon as he entered the room, and addressed him in the following manner. "Sir Edward, I know the motive of your journey here. You come with the base design of reproaching me for having entered into an indissoluble engagement with my Laura without your consent. But, sir, I glory in the act. It is my greatest boast that I have incurred the displeasure of my father." So saying, he took my hand, and while Sir Edward, Philippa, and Augusta were doubtless reflecting with admiration on his undaunted bravery, led me from the parlor to his father's carriage, which yet remained at the door, and in which we were instantly conveyed from the pursuit of Sir Edward. Book 8. Why should this last disappointment hang so heavily on my spirits? Why should I feel it more? Why should it wound me deeper than those I have experienced before? Can it be that I have a greater affection for Willoughby than I had for his amiable predecessors? Or is it that our feelings become more acute from being often wounded? I must suppose, my dear Belle, that this is the case, since I am not conscious of being more sincerely attached to Willoughby than I was to Neville, Fitzowen, or either of the Crawfords, for all of whom I once felt the most lasting affection that ever warmed a woman's heart. Tell me then, dear Belle, why I still sigh when I think of the faithless Edward, or why I weep when I behold his bride, for too surely this is the case. My friends are all alarmed for me. They fear my declining health. They lament my want of spirits. They dread the effects of both. In hopes of relieving my melancholy, by directing my thoughts to other objects, they have invited several of their friends to spend the holy days with us. Lady Bridget Darkwood and her sister-in-law, Miss Jane, are expected on Friday, and Colonel Seaton's family will be with us next week. This is all most kindly meant by my uncle and cousins, but what can the presence of a dozen indifferent people do to me but weary and distress me? I will not finish my letter till some of our visitors are arrived, Fire Day evening. Lady Bridget came this morning, and with her her sweet sister, Miss Jane. Although I have been acquainted with this charming woman above 15 years, yet I never before observed how lovely she is. She is now about 35, and in spite of sickness, sorrow, and time, is more blooming than I ever saw a girl of 17. I was delighted with her the moment she entered the house, and she appeared equally pleased with me, attaching herself to me during the remainder of the day. There is something so sweet, so mild in her countenance, that she seems more than mortal. Her conversation is as bewitching as her appearance. I could not help telling her how much she engaged my admiration. "Oh, Miss Jane," said I, and stopped from an inability at the moment of expressing myself as I could wish. "Oh, Miss Jane," I repeated. I could not think of words to suit my feelings. She seemed waiting for my speech. I was confused, distressed. My thoughts were bewildered, and I could only add, "How do you do?" She saw and felt for my embarrassment, and with admirable presence of mind relieved me from it by saying, "My dear Sophia, be not uneasy at having exposed yourself. I will turn the conversation without appearing to notice it." Oh, how I loved her for her kindness! "Do you ride as much as you used to do?" said she. "I am advised to ride by my physician. We have delightful rides round us. I have a charming horse, am uncommonly fond of the amusement." Replied, I quite recovered from my confusion, and, in short, I ride a great deal. "You are in the right, my love," said she. Then, repeating the following line, which was an extempore and equally adapted to recommend both riding and candor. "Ride where you may, be candid where you can," she added. "I rode once, but it is many years ago." She spoke this in so low and tremulous a voice that I was silent. Struck with her manner of speaking, I could make no reply. "I have not ridden," continued she, fixing her eyes on my face, "since I was married." I was never so surprised. "Married, ma'am," I repeated. "You may well wear that look of astonishment," said she, "since what I have said must appear improbable to you. Yet nothing is more true than that I once was married."
Well, Carissa sure couldn't infer anything about the world from this, but maybe Keltham's outthinking her once again.
What the ass, Galarian. He wants to say that the conspiracy wouldn't be this whack, but that's a dangerous thing to think if they've been reading his mind. He'll suspend judgment until he reads more of this whack shit. Message to proprietor. Any mysteries or romances that would deal heavily with magic, gods, or afterlives. Maybe that just gets him conspiracy-selected rewritten books, but even those might be enlightening if they give him a point of comparison to the other novels.
Don't substitute rewritten books. They'll stand out too much. Yes, I know. We determined that they were reasonable for the genre, yes. I know that the Supreme Elect actually did say approximately that. Doesn't mean we don't lose bits on it. They are not reasonable for the set of books that this bookstore has. We have a year to fix that if we don't make him suspicious today.
Well, in some of the romances, people are religious. Is that what you mean? I don't think we stock any romances about the gods. The gods aren't, they don't have the bodies for that, the kid says aloud. I can check if we have in stock anywhere the man is a wizard. Usually he's a noble, though, or an exiled noble, or an adventurer, but not specifically a wizard.
Stories in which somebody dies, goes to an afterlife, gets resurrected. Stories where the details of magic play a key role in the story. Stories where somebody goes through priest training. Anything like that, anywhere in the fiction section?
Probably. They're not sorted by that, though. He'll try to find some. He takes a big stack off the shelf and starts sorting through them, frowning.
All right, time to at least take a stab at going on the offensive. If you do nothing but play defense all day, you lose.
Is the shop your father's?
My mum's.
Can you call her in for a big purchase like this, where it'd help to have someone who knows all the books like the back of their hand?
Call her in how?
Well, is she in the back room taking a nap or at the market or...
Wheel days she takes off. Sometimes she goes to the temple, sometimes she spends it with Tateo, the man she's sleeping with. Sometimes she goes and scribes records in the Temple of Abadar in the Low District for extra spending money.
Come on, Keltham, bite.
The kid is, allegedly, not even the real bookshop manager. Right then. Message to Fenalosa. All right, let's abort here, buy the ones we've scanned so far, and look for a bookshop with an intelligent-looking proprietor who says they know a lot about their stock. Playing information games where they would have to make up a large amount of information very quickly will go better if Keltham can find somebody who will function as an index into that information. If they were trying to get Keltham to go somewhere a putative conspiracy puppet was suggesting he go, good luck with that. Keltham didn't even notice whatever bait that was, but that's in part because he was treating that as putative scripted conspiracy chatter anyways, in the world he needs to distinguish.
Acknowledged, says Fenalosa, and he resumes the argument about the price of the books.
Keltham will wait it out. He's not that fond of overpaying for large quantities of books.
The way I see it, the boy says, you're a powerful wizard and you're in a hurry for mysterious reasons, so you aren't actually going to leave all your precious books here if they're 4 gold apiece.
I can get them somewhere else for 2, disguised as not a powerful wizard, so I absolutely might be ordered to do that. He didn't find what he was looking for anyway. This is just for completeness.
2 gold apiece, and you tell me the big secret mystery of who you work for and what he wants with romances where someone dies and gets raised.
No deal. 2 gold apiece, and I get back to defending your stupid ass from demons and Kuthites. How about that?
Absalom can defend itself just fine, thanks.
2 gold apiece for the books and 2 gold for you to buy yourself a treat or a girl, whatever. Final offer. If you don't take it, I will forcefully recommend to my mysterious patron that we leave without buying anything.
Fine.
Maybe that proof his students gave for corporations being impossible in Golarion, because people would just bribe each other to act against corporate interests, was in fact correct.
Different bookshop. By the time they reach it, they've made arrangements with the proprietor, a kindly old man who will happily fish out a large number of romances and mysteries that involve magic, priests, or resurrection.
Not the question Keltham starts with. He wants a book critical of Cheliax, ideally opened fairly straight to a section with the criticism.
But of course, young man, let me get it from the back room. I keep all the politically sensitive material in the back room, you know, so no one can say I was flaunting it. He leaves and returns shortly with On the Manifest Failures of Character and Leadership of Abrogale Thrune. It's stolen more or less wholesale from a popular critique of Talder's Grand Prince with the city names changed. But if anything, they're currently thinking that's safer than trying to compose well-written critiques.
Somebody wrote an entire book critical of Abrogale personally. Who does that? Who the ass does that? How does Abrogale live on a planet like this? Message. Book critical of Cheliax, not of Abrogale personally.
Sorry, what?
Message. I'm looking for books critical of policies and choices of Cheliax, the country. Abrogale. Thrune's character and leadership would only matter insofar as that led to Cheliax having bad policy stances, and I'd want the focus to be on Cheliax's policy stances rather than what somebody had to say about a person.
That's just not really how criticisms of a country are written. You either write that the king is wise and being misled by unwise advisers, or, as the author of On the Manifest Failures of Character and Leadership of Abrogale Thrune, you write about how the king is bad at their job. Or you write about the necessity of uniting to exterminate the people of Cheliax, but I actually don't stock that kind of nonsense. I think it's deleterious to the national character.
Do you have any books critical of Cheliax which don't contain the subphrase Abrogale Thrune in the title? He can't buy this shit. It's not just the implied disservice to Abrogale of rewarding an author who did that, it's the near certainty that everything in the book is going to be wrong. Sane people don't give books titles like that.
I assume you do not want a similar book on her predecessor?
Her predecessor?
Infrexus Thrune? When he was in power, I had brisk sales of The Scandals and Idiocy of Infrexus Thrune. And after his death, I did well with The Best Thing Infrexus Thrune Ever Did for Cheliax Was Drown. Though if I still have any copies, they'll be hard to find. They stopped selling well a decade ago.
Sorry, I'm not as familiar with Chelish history as I should be. And Phrexus Thrune drowned, and then his daughter Abigail inherited the country?
His niece, and no, there was a civil war, which she won. Do you just want an ordinary history of Cheliax, maybe?
I'll take up to 20 different ones if you've got that many.
I assume that doesn't count different editions of the textbooks issued in Chelish schools? I have 10 of those alone, but they only change a bit here and there most years.
Sure, I'll take them all. He's impressed with the putative conspiracy if they've produced a textbook series with slight variations like that, though Asmodia is that smart, as is Carissa for that matter. What else you got?
A tactical account of the Chelish Civil War. I don't know if military history is an interest of yours, but it's acclaimed as a very well-researched work of military history, how the Church claimed Cheliax. Also mostly a military history, but focused on the involvement of the Church of Asmodeus, the revival of the Empire, which I thought was schlocky nonsense, Avastan's Queen, which gets indecorous in places but has some interesting details about court in Igorian.
That's 4. Anything else? Reign of what-wash-his name the drowned guy? By the way, how does drowning manage to be a permanent problem around here?
He was drowned by his personal guard when they decided to go in for Abigail. It wasn't itself militarily decisive, but, well, when that's how you die, you can't particularly expect coming back to go well.
Okay, that's kind of, attractive and worrying at the same time, really. Any other books on Cheliax, critical or otherwise?
I have specialty trade publications, Chelish grain imports by year for the last decade, Chelish wizarding education, Chelish military contracts.
I'll take those too. But just the 4 books on Cheliax, aside from the textbooks and trade publications, can you bring those out? A loss of internal cognitive control, a flash of betrayed thought. Keltham is planning to ask for literally any other books at all, putatively by any of those authors.
That's very good to have advance warning of, because they did not attribute those books to specific noted historians, but they totally can do that on 10 seconds' notice. Out he comes with the 4 books.
Then he'll ask the question he was planning to ask.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059